The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archive series. Hey there everybody, welcome to Fantasy Inc. My name is Wyeth, and today we're going to be talking about what could be Brandon Sanderson's masterpiece. Let's do this. Before we jump into the details, I'm going to give y'all a little reminder on how this channel works. The first part of the video is going to be spoiler-free for those of you who have not checked this series out, but for many of those who I think have, the latter part of the video is going to be the deep dive, talking about the spoilers and what we loved about the book. So let's jump into it. The Stormlight Archive series is something very interesting that Brandon Sanderson is taking on. He has, as many of y'all know, built out his own literary universe, the Cosmere, and in this universe he has tied together many of his adult fantasy books that may have nothing to do with each other at first glance, but ideally will have an overarching plot line throughout all of them as he gets further on into his career. The Stormlight Archives is a planned for 10-book series with currently 4 books out. But we're not here to talk about the series as a whole. Today we are speaking on just The Way of Kings, Book 1. For a quick synopsis, we have many different perspectives in this book, but I'll be sticking with the main 3. The first character that we get to see of some importance is named Kaladin, a young man who is a soldier but found himself falling on some hard times, whether they were of his own volition or whether they were thrust upon him. You will have to read to find out. And he is currently traveling with a slave caravan, and not very much in the good way. There's really no good way if you look at it like that, but the worst way, and he is on his way to what is called the Shattered Plains. Our perspective switches over then to a young woman named Shalon Devar, a noble woman from a middling house which is slowly but surely deteriorating, and she has a gambit in mind to try and fix that situation. Her goal is to become the ward or student of a very high-stationed noblewoman named Yasna Kholin, the sister to the current king of Alethkar. There she plans on enacting a very risky plan, but if her gambit works, it could mean the saving of her house. So she has a lot of motivation to make sure it does. Finally, our last main character is Dalinar Kholin, the uncle to Yasna and uncle to the king of Alethkar, and he is a very stoic man. In his previous years, he was a bloodthirsty brute to say the least, but after a very traumatic event, he then changes to become the ideal nobleman. He has decided to live his life by the codes and vice versa, made his camp and sons follow said codes that were written in a very old book called The Way of Kings. And that is where this book gets its namesake. Now that we've talked about some of the main characters, and don't get me wrong, there's many more that are just fantastic reads, let's go ahead and talk about why you should pick up this book. To speak about the author, Brandon Sanderson has one of the most impressive resumes when it comes to fantasy authors. Whether it's the Mistborn series you may know him by, or him finishing the work of Robert Jordan, the last 3 books in the Wheel of Time series, Brandon Sanderson has only gotten better as a writer. When it comes to the setting and the world building that he has created here, it is like no other fantasy book that I personally have ever read, and I have listened to quite a lot. The setting of the world is very interesting. We as readers are really only getting to see 2 different main locations in this book, and they are pretty spectacular. Whether it's the rock plateaus with the chasms at the Shattered Plains, or the great library overseen by King Taravangian, you really do feel like you're just sitting as a fly on the walls as you're reading these scenes, because you can just picture them so clearly in your mind, or at least I can. And the magic system is nothing to scoff at either. There are creatures known as Sprin. You can think of them almost like fairies, but even though that might be blasphemous, that's the closest description I can get to it, and they are very ethereal-like. They pop into existence when very strong emotion is felt, whether that be hatred, glory, happiness, pain, and being tied to said emotion, other characters are able to more easily read what people are feeling if they cannot control them. There's also shard blades and shard plate, which is basically magical armor and swords, and It gives a very visceral feel when you're reading or listening to it, and you are envious of the power that they hold in the palm of their hands. Where these shards come from, we'll have to keep reading to find on out, but for those of you who have not checked this book out, it is very interesting. I'd like to go into more details, but I worry I would spoil too much. So again, if you've not checked this series out, you do need to pick this one on up. I think of it as one of the new pillars of the fantasy genre, and if you want to be a part of the conversation, you have to be able to have this series in your repertoire, in my humble opinion. Now we're going to go ahead and jump on over to the deep dive for those of you who have read the book, and we're going to be going into the spoilers on why this is such a good series to read. Let's do this. I don't know about y'all, but I gotta say the most captivating part of this series has definitely gotta be Bridge 4, the bridge run specifically, and Kaladin's ability to make soldiers out of slaves. Going back this time around and rereading it, I did get a lot more appreciation for Shallan's section of the books as well as Dalinar's, and I'm very happy that I had picked this one back on up, and I'm really looking forward to rereading the rest of the series. But that's enough about that. Let's jump into what we loved about this one. When it comes to Kaladin's background, I really do think his hero's journey could have easily become one of a villain. He had so much faith in Amaran as an honorable man, and after the death of his brother when he was supposed to be a page out on the battlefields, as well as the death of his men by Amaran's main bodyguard, he really just became a broken man. And his Sprinsil was really able to pull a man on the brink of death back from the edge. Quite literally, actually, now that I think about it. And from that moment on, he decided he's got a second life now, and he better put it to good use. He is able to do that by protecting those who cannot protect themselves. How he does it is very impressive. He gives them the ability to protect themselves. And if that's not an honorable cause to follow a protagonist with, I really don't know what is. Going over to Shallan, she had a lot of character development in just this one book. Starting as a very timid young gal with a very clever tongue on her, Jasnah was able to turn her not only into a scholar, but also into the noblewoman that she needs to become if she wants to survive in this world. Going back, looking at the series again, I wasn't a big fan of her relationship with Capsule. It was pretty obvious that he was pretending to be an ardent, seeing as he was, for the times, throwing himself at her. And if you're really a man of the cloth, I would imagine that you have a little more dignity. But when I first read it, I have to admit, it was a complete shock to me. So to that end, I guess it is either my own ignorance or Brandon Sanderson really putting in some great foreshadowing. When it comes to her mentor, Jasnah Kholin, I gotta say Shallan lucked out, and if I had someone like that in my own life, trust me, I would be a millionaire by now. Jasnah is truly an incredibly intelligent woman and is probably one of my favorite characters in the series as a whole. Someone who is so cut and dry, but has a lot of layers to her character. It's very evident that she's not two-dimensional, but it's how she comes off at the beginning, and the further you get into the series, you realize that she has a lot more going on. Going over to the political strifes in the new capital of Alethkar, the Shattered Plains, Dalinar is fumbling the bag. As we got to the end of the book, we can kind of see he's learning his lessons, and they are hard-learned lessons, and if it wasn't for Kaladin and Bridge 4 coming to his aid, he would just be an honorable dead man instead of one that is alive and needs to finish the fight. And he is able to learn these lessons very slowly, some might say, but he's able to get there. If it wasn't for Navani, his sister-in-law, now lover, he would really just be falling apart, to be quite candid, because he needs that human element to bring him back. He's been this stone of a figure, even to his sons, for a very long time now, 6 years to be specific, since the death of Galinar, his brother, and she's able to give a little life to this incredibly stoic sad man, which is definitely needed. Discounting the bridge crew of Bridge 4, the magic system is the best part of this story. You can tell Mr. Sanderson put a lot of time into the Spren being attracted to, if not embodying, emotion in itself and the ideals that come with it. And it really does show. Soul casting itself is a really spectacular idea, having to barter and convince different objects to change or become something else. And I'm really looking forward to, while I'm rereading, getting to see the different conversations that mainly Shallan is going to have to try to convince these different objects to change. Because it's not just going to be the Stormlight that is going to do it, she has to use her words, which she's fairly good at. When it came to the conclusion of The Way of Kings, I thought it was very well wrapped up, whether it be Dalinar and Adolin being left on the plateau after Sadeas had abandoned them, and Kaladin as well as Bridge 4 came to their rescue, Shallan finally confronting Yasna about soul casting, not needing a soul caster to do it, or even us getting to see a different side of Taravangian, the so-called simple-minded king, as he conducts his dreadful experiments on his own people. One of my final thoughts I want to bring on up is the philosophical and ethical questions raised in this book, whether it be about religion in general, with Shallan's conversations with Yasna, or what is the right thing to do when it comes to Dalinar speaking with himself, or Kaladin speaking with Syl. We as readers are with them in these scenes and are also given the chance to kind of ponder on some of these questions. Brandon Sanderson obviously gives some great answers through the voices of his characters, but at the end of the day, the questions are raised and we as readers get to actually, if we take the time, think about them ourselves. And it's very interesting to be reading a fantasy book and being able to philosophize a little bit. Maybe it's my inner freshman from college getting to romanticize this idea. Going off of this idea, we get to see philosophy incarnate when it comes to my personal favorite character, and as Mr. Sanderson has said, one of the hardest to write in any series he has done, Wit. Wit is the embodiment of confusion for those who are not prepared for him, but if you really do get to reread his words and his responses, as well as the questions he poses, he is very, very insightful and quite funny. I'm honestly forgetting the significance of his character as of right now, and that's the really cool part about going back and rereading a series that you have not touched in a while. You get the opportunity to look at it with not fresh eyes, but pretty dang close to them. You get to relive the excitement that you got when you initially read the series. You'll never capture that great enjoyment. You know, you may learn that if you've ever chased the dragon before. This is probably not the best advice to give about this context. It is quite enjoyable once you've put something down and picked it back up. Speaking strictly about books, I promise. With all that said, I do appreciate all y'all's time. Please feel free to give me your thoughts on The Way of Kings specifically. I plan on doing a series review up to book 4, the most current one that's out, in a week or two, so keep your eyes out for that video. I hope all of y'all have an absolutely fantastic day, and be sure to keep reading.